This standalone section is a chapeau for an introduction to one of the most significant battles of the Cold War. It was a conflict over morality and justice between Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and J. Edgar Hoover, who was a despot who ruled for more than 4 decades. That war consumed John Kennedy and eventually his brother, Robert Kennedy. It resulted not once but twice with a brush with Armageddon that would have destroyed us all, leaving our precious orb of life in the grip of death for hundreds and probably thousands of millennia. It may surprise historians and researchers to discover that a great many of the darkest aspects of this apocalyptic story still remain hidden. As Tenant Pete Bagley labored to warn us, the ghosts of these wars still hover over humanity. The untold countless lies of spies make possible the current death knell of democracy and the blossoming of global tyranny. I am sworn to spend the rest of my days holding to my covenants with the universe until I am no more. And when the introductions are finished on Channel 1 of YouTube's Ghost of the Spy Wars work, Channel 2, and then 3, and then 4 will open. And so now we begin with the prophecy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and how, over time, his footsteps have been erased. One of the major episodes in the battle between the forces of light and darkness during the 20th century was the war waged on Martin Luther King Jr. by FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. Despite the appalling record of indifference to the personal and institutional evil at play in that portentous confrontation, ignorance of this American tragedy remains widespread today. Although King's 1955 prophecy about the future enlightenment of civilization is yet to be widely taught in the ivory towers of academia, rest assured that one day it will be so. But presently, Psalm 127:12 sums up our lot. Lest the Lord keepeth the city, the watchman yet waketh in vain. So for the time being, King's footsteps and his prophecy have been erased. And so here is King's prophecy, made on 5 December 1955 at the Hull Street mass meeting in Montgomery, Alabama. That night he declared, "When the history books are written in the future, somebody will have to say, there lived a race of black people who injected a new meaning into the veins of history and of civilization." When he uttered those words, he became a prophet who had he's 26 years old, he had just 12 years and 4 months to live. Martin Luther King Jr. was born on 15 January 1929 at 501 Auburn Avenue, Atlanta, Georgia. That was the year of the Wall Street crash, the year that ushered in the Great Depression and the riots in Jerusalem between Muslims and Jews over access to the Western Wall. It was the year when little children in Italy were taught that they owed the same loyalty to fascism as they did to God. That year, India declared independence of Great Britain. And the Soviet Union's Joseph Stalin ousted Leon Trotsky and initiated the merciless adoption of collectivization on hundreds of millions of people living without sufficient food, clothing, and shelter. It was the year of Ernest Hemingway's A Farewell to Arms, a book about a world war won. The struggle between light and dark was already destined by the births of 6 unsuspecting men. And here's the list of the combatants in that conflict. As you can see as you peruse it on this slide, all of them were born before Dr. King, and all 6 of them were destined to become inextricably intertwined in a thespian drama. The actors were drawn into a spinning vortex whose eddies and torrents none of them understood. For each man, it began as a dance in the void, and it ended with the fate of our planet hanging on a thread. And here we have the rogues gallery of the dark forces. At the top, J. Edgar Hoover. In the middle, Morris Allen. And then in the bottom left-hand corner, the CIA mole in Martin Luther King's inner circle. Of these 3 combatants here, the third born on the bottom left began as a communist and reversed his orientation and was then forced to work for Hoover as a mole against civil rights or face jail instead. For his own purposes, Hoover found it necessary in the end to hand over this mole to the CIA. And in the agency's Office of Security, it was the mind control officer, Morris Allen in the center picture there, who became the mole's case officer. And arrayed against those 3 are these 3 King's forces of light: John Kennedy, Stanley Levison, and Harry Belafonte. Levison and Belafonte joined King's team. But due to the mole's scheming, neither Levison nor Belafonte knew that the mole had penetrated the other. And neither of them knew about the mole's penetration of King's inner circle. Much later, in August 1963, the CIA mole was finally unmasked. King, Levison, and Belafonte all learned the truth about the penetration right after Martin Luther King delivered his I Have a Dream speech on the Mall in Washington, D.C. That speech had followed directly on the heels of President Kennedy's 10 June 1963 appeal for détente with the USSR at the commencement at American University. And then the very night afterwards, Kennedy's 11 June 1963 televised address appealing for real civil rights reforms. I've written extensively on the 1960 election campaign of John Kennedy and how it was impossible without King's support. Chapter 1, Into the Storm. I have no time now to go into those details. There'll be plenty of opportunities to do that in the future. But one thing I want to emphasize is this. Without King's support, JFK would not have been elected. And JFK is the one who stopped global Armageddon from happening, not once, but twice. So without King's support, you and I would not be here today. All 3 of those men, both the Kennedys and King, paid with their lives to save our planet. I think it's safe to say that the footsteps of King's prophecy have been buried in dust and debate, while his murder and the details of that loom large. But the day of his prophecy will reign at some point. Although it will, it's still waiting in the wind today.